So in Fiddler, if we attempt to make the request to diaries, remember we changed it to counting K's authorization, it's going to unsurprisingly give us an unauthorized. Our code is actually being run, and we know that because we can see that the www authenticate header is being passed in. We're telling anyone who cares that we support basic authentication. Our scheme name is counting Ks, and that the location, if you want to just go into a web browser, is to go to our account login. So how do we actually authenticate it here using basic authentication? We can do this by including the header authorization and using the word basic so that we're telling it we want basic authorization. This should look familiar because we're actually looking to see whether basic is the type of the authorization header. A header is just another line in the request. It's nothing magical. It's not a piece of XML or some additional file that's being transferred. It's just a piece of text that we're including. And after basic, we want to be able to give it the credentials, right? As some just string after it. That's the parameter of the authorization header. How do we actually encode this? Because remember, if you remember from the code a moment ago, this was base64 encoded and encoded using a specific text encoding to support extended characters. There are ways to do this in JavaScript, but instead of diving down into client code, let's just go ahead and make our quick version of it by using Firefox. So let's go to a website called base64encode.org. Simple little tool that I like to use for testing, where you simply type in some text, tell it to encode, and it'll base64 encode it for you, right? We're going to actually encode our username and password separated by a colon. So it's going to be Sean Wildermuth, and my password is Pluralsight. Again, not the safest password, but you understand which. And we want to make sure and encode it using what we've specified is going to be the right encoding, which in most cases is going to be ISO 8859-1. Let's go ahead and encode that. And here is that magic string we need to include as the parameter. There's the parameter. In this case, we're going to include it, and this is the base64 encoded version of Sean Wildermuth Pluralsight. And if everything went well, we're now getting our data. Because we're including our authentication credentials here directly inside of the authorization header. This means you're going to have your client code, or you're going to have to instruct the users of your API to use basic authentication in this way, as one of the ways they can actually do this. Now again, if you don't want to leak these credentials to the clients that are actually writing it, that gets a little more difficult, and that we'll need to use one of the other authentication schemes that we're going to talk about soon. But for simple, direct ways of just using headers to authenticate your application, this ends up being pretty easy.